Hi. In this film I'm going to talk about this. This is the stove that I've just bought, and it's the Outbacker Ecoburn Firebox stove oven, and we're going to do a genuine unboxing, put it together and possibly do a bit of cooking on it. Really excited about this one, so let's see. And this is quite exciting because this is the box that's arrived from the Outbacker stove company, and this is a genuine unboxing. You can see the tape on the side here hasn't been touched yet, so I'm going to get a knife and we'll open it and see what's in the box. Always exciting to open a box, isn't it? It doesn't leave you. So here we have the contents of the box, and within that box is another box with a bit of packaging, and we've got a couple of spares which I'll talk to you about in a minute. So I'll just put this packaging in out of the wind. This is something we don't need today. I'll talk about that in a future film. It's a flashing bit of equipment. I might mention it briefly later on. The bag to put it in, and that's another bit of flue pipe which we don't need just at the minute. But within that box that I showed you is the stove, and as you can see, this is the Outbacker Big Window Firebox Pro Ecoburn Oven Stove. As you can see, considering there's a stove with a firebox and an oven in here, it's not big, but it's just what I need. It's the size which is important to me. And in here, got a protective bit of wood. We've got the instruction leaflet, I would imagine. We'll have a read of that in a minute. And in here we've got a side rack, and those I can see are the handles, the door handles. Bit of packaging for the stove, and in here is the actual stove. So let's get rid of the packaging. Put that away, and then this is the stove. Now I'll give you the exact measurements of it when we've got it all set up. I've seen a couple of people who've bought this stove and said, oh, I didn't realise it was that size, because the website, the Outbacker website, isn't actually perfectly clear on the size. And this is what you get. That's our little stove. So I'll take this polystyrene packaging away and we can have a better look. So this is it straight out of the box, not being touched by me. And you can see there, that's the firebox there, and this is the oven. And it's quite small, dinky, but pretty good for what I need. I've done a lot of research and this is the one that I've opted for. So let's have a look and see what you get. Those are pretty tight on there, and just open those up, and there's the two compartments open. Now in the firebox here you can see these, they look dead small, don't they, but these are the sections for the flue. And I'll get them all out there. The ones that fit in here especially fit in there because they're the right length for the actual firebox. So there's 2, 4, 6 of those, and this one's got holes in the top. I'll explain that in a minute. And then in the oven compartment you've got some more. These ones are probably about 4 centimeters longer, and if you put them in there they won't fit, so they have to fit in the oven compartment. And there's 2, 4, 6 of those. So I'll unwrap those so we can get everything out on the ground sheet and have a look. Now I know already that the length of this flue is about 2.1 meters, and that gives enough rise from the actual stove itself to let the smoke be away from you when you're in your tipi or whatever you're in. These are actually designed for use in things like yurts and tipis, but as you saw from the bag that comes with it, the bag is so that you can carry it around. If you were camping out in the woods somewhere and put your tipi up in the woods, you could carry this without having to lug it around like that. You've got the handles on the bag. I've seen people who've taken these down to allotments or used them on the beach or somewhere, which is great if that's the way you want to use them. But this is the section that's quite an important one. We'll talk about that one later, because all of the sections of flue they're 60 mil in diameter. I'll measure them accurately in a minute, and they've all got a flange on one end, apart from this one, which has got a double flange. Just if you like to have a close look at that. So there's a double flange on this end. That's only one of them like that, and it's one of the longer ones. I'll talk about that in a minute, how it's used. And the last one. So that's them all set out. It's a bit windy today, so again I'll take the rubbish and just put it in the box. In here, this is the oven section. We have a tray that's already wrapped, nice little baking tray. Make sure you get all the plastic off because that will just burn. That's it, so that's a tray. And there's also a small grill. There are 2 shelves. There are shelves in there, a middle one, and then a top one. And the tray fits on there. We'll measure that shortly. Now underneath the grate, the fire grate, there's another little tray. Just get that out. And this is your ashtray. So when you've done a burn, the ash falls through and lands on this little tray. It will catch most of it, probably won't catch all of it. And then on here, there are a couple of other things. That's a bit of self-adhesive fire rope. And then here's your ashtray. I mean, it's a small stove, you're going to get a small ashtray. And that's that, so that fits in there. It'll just catch some of it, but it'll be easy to get it out and then use it to throw it away. Right, and away in the back there, which I'm going to have to find some way of getting out, is in there is a Jubilee clip with a couple of wire rings on. I'll talk about that shortly as well. These 2 pieces here are the glass for the firebox and a small one for the oven. I'll open these up and then we'll have all the parts out, and I'll have a quick look at the instructions as well, and we'll take it from there. A quick look at the instruction manual. It's quite simple, straightforward. It tells you about lighting the stove, first uses, and caution about not burning yourself, and important information about carbon monoxide, and then general information, warranty, and how to fit the glass on the firebox. And that's it. Very straightforward and simple. One of the jobs I have to do is fit these two pieces of glass into the doors. Obviously the larger ones for the firebox and the smaller ones for the oven. Now the firebox one has got this self-adhesive rope on it. It's sort of a soft but fireproof rope that actually fits on the inside of the door, just on the edge of the window aperture. And so we've got to cut those into 4 little pieces and stick them onto the inside there of that door, and then the glass fits on the front. And I'll get on and do that. So it's a case of just measuring pieces of the rope, snipping it to size, and then these are probably the same size, but just so you get them. And this puts a sort of a bed between the glass and the metal of the door, which not only helps to keep the glass in place, but prevents any drafts coming in around the side of the glass. You'll notice that at the top of the door, I'll just see if I can show you better there. At the top of the door there's a little recess there, and that's not a manufacturing error. What that is, I would imagine it's what's, I think they call it an air wash system, where when the fire's going, air gets drawn down through here and it comes down, and it is actually behind the glass as you're looking at the door, and that stops, it should help to stop the glass from smoking up, and that's why that's there, that little recess there is part of this air wash system. Yeah, I've just got to stick those on. That's them. Now to fit the glass, you'll see that there's 4 little clips. You just undo those. You can actually undo them by hand or get a little pair of pliers if you need to. And you're fitting your glass in. It's a bit fiddly, but once you've got the first 1 or 2 on, they'll be alright. Just do them loosely to start with, obviously making sure you hold the glass. You don't want to drop the glass. It is thick glass, of course, because it's on the front of a firebox. Just doing them up finger tight. So that the glass is held securely in place, but you don't want to put it on too tight, because you might just crack the glass if you do them up too tight. But that's the glass is now nice and solid in. For the oven you do the same thing again, just undo there's 2 flanges on this side, and there's 2 little lips there, and the glass just fits on those in between there, and then again do them up hand tight. There's no fire rope on this one. Okay, that's the glass in. You can see that the oven thermometer is already fitted, but if you needed to adjust that at all, there's a little wing nut on the back, and that does that. The last job to do is to get this little packet here, and it's got two handles, and these are the door handles for both the firebox and for the oven. And in the packet, this little packet here, you'll see the two handles and an Allen key and a couple of nuts. This is why I put the tarpaulin down. I didn't want the little parts to fall down between the decking. And these are quite straightforward, just looks like you slot them on there. And there's a little nut with a spring on it. They go in there. And you just use the Allen key to fit them on. And then the other one fits on there, same thing again. Those two fitted now. There's a reason why there's these little spring nuts on there. Do you see that those two handles of mine aren't quite even? When I shut the door, that doesn't sit quite right. You can lift the handles towards you, and the spring allows you to turn the handles to whichever position you want for when you want to open the door, and so they would match. And I'm happy with that, because that shows to me that door locks and shut and those handles in the same position. Next, we're going to lift it up onto its legs. Just tip it onto its back, and there's the legs. They're just straightforward and they fold out like that. This is the new version of the stove, of course, because the older versions had a simple sort of heavy gauge wire loop around front and back, but they've upgraded them now to have these much sturdier legs on. Make sure that they're out securely, and then I'm going to put it on this flat surface. It just so happens that when I made this decking, I set this flag into the decking, into the wooden decking, because this is where we have our fire pit during the summer. This is where I'm going to set the stove going this morning. Next job is to put the flue on. Now, you remember I spoke to you about the different pieces of flue, and one of the things I did before I bought this, I spoke to the manufacturer and I confirmed different aspects of the stove before I came out to do this film. And there's been different films that I've seen on YouTube talking about this flanged flue pipe, flanged at both ends. This is the piece that is to go on first, and it slots on just like that. This is the section that you'll have at the bottom, and there's a good reason for that. Once you've got that on, you can just build up the sections of the stove by putting piece into piece. It doesn't really matter if they're long or short, they just go on. The one that stays at the very top is this one. This is a spark arrestor. These holes are to stop sparks coming out and maybe catching fire to local undergrowth or something like that. So that's the one that goes on the top. You can see it's got like a rain guard on there, and you just build up the sections of the flue. And obviously the secret is that when you put the spark arrestor on the top, it's quite high up, so what you do is you build up a few sections of the flue like that, and then that goes on there, and that's your flue. Now, you know, it's only very light and I won't say flimsy, but it's going to move around, and that's what this is for. This Jubilee clip and these two rings. And what you do, you'd put them quite high up on the flue pipe. Put it on there, tighten it up, and then these two rings, you'll attach some sort of guy rope, and then you peg it out, and that'll give your flue a bit of stability if you're using this outside, especially on a windy day. It's not too bad today, so we're going to do without that. And that's the stove assembled, ready for burning. Yeah, and one other piece which I'll put on just to show you. Is this little rack, and that fits on the back of the stove. Just round here you'll see there's two little lugs, and that fits in there. And I suppose the idea is that you could keep pots warm or something like that, and just adds a good little rack. You're not going to cook on it, but it's just going to be there for an extra sort of storage shelf. So before I set the fire going, we'll just have a look at some of the other parts which I didn't show you before. So obviously that's your vent at the bottom, open and shut. Another feature on the stove is this little plate on the top here, which you just turn and lift off, and you can see there into the firebox. Now obviously you're going to need gloves or something to lift that off when the fire's going, because that's going to get really hot, but there's no tool for actually doing that. There's just little finger slots, so that might be a little bit awkward, but we'll talk about that when I've got the fire going. Round on the side here you'll see these two little plates that are undone by Allen keys, and you take those off and you get a brush in there, and when you've had it going for a fair while you can do a bit of cleaning out of the inner section of the oven. The better you keep the stove clean, then the more efficiently it's going to be working. So the next thing to do is get it going. Because this is the first burn on this stove, even though we use a wood burner in the house, these are the bits and pieces that I've got together to get the fire going in the stove. So obviously a lighter. I've got some little fire lighting blocks. You're able to use these to get the initial flame going. Little bits of dry kindling, and then some dry wood. The most important thing about using a stove like this is to just use dry wood. If you use wood that's slightly wet, you're going to clog up the fire, and it's not going to work anywhere near as efficiently as by using the dry wood that they recommend. Now, a couple of other things I'm going to feature in probably a later film is the use of these things, which are called fire logs, and these are definitely a no-no for stoves like this, but also these, which are compressed shavings and sawdust, which you can buy, and we use these on the fire at home, but we're not going to use these today. I'll do that in another film. We're just going to use what the manufacturer recommends, and that's good, dry, seasoned logs. So we're going to use some of these. I got these in a local hardware store, and a little pack like that was £1, and you only need to use a couple at a time. We'll use those in a minute. And you can see that there's not a huge firebox, but you've got to do a very sort of a easy burn to start with when the stove is just new. And what we're going to do, we put a couple of the bigger logs, I say bigger logs, the larger pieces of dry in the bottom first, and then we'll make a little stack of kindling sort of crisscross that go on the top there. And this method is a bit like what they call the top-down method of setting a fire going, which is a really efficient way of getting the fire going. You just set them in there like that. So the lighter stuff is actually on the top of the larger pieces of wood. And then these little things, you see it's almost like a candle and it just lights, and we just put that in the bottom there just for this burn. And there's a couple of those, and that should set the fire away. And we close the door. Now at the minute that's it shut, but I've just pushed it to open, and that lets a bit of draft in. Now you'll see some smoke coming off the stove to start with, and this is why you do a fairly gentle burn. It's basically curing the paint. It's, you know, the paint hasn't had any serious heat on it since it's been manufactured, and you'll get this, it's coming off the plate first, but it'll come off around the sides, and the more you have the fire going, you'll see some of the smoke. And this is why it's probably a best idea to do your first burn of the stove outside where there's plenty of through air. And if you set this going in a yurt or a tent first, then obviously it's going to be really smoky, because that's coming straight off the stove and not out of the flue. So it's been going 15 minutes, just a steady, slow burn, and I'm just going to top it up with a bit more dry wood. Now, just as a warning, these handles, on some stoves, the handle's made out of different material and they stay quite cool. I warn you that I have seen it on different films about this stove that they don't stay cool. So wear heat-proof gloves, or like an oven glove to open these, otherwise you'll only do it once. So just open that and then put a bit more wood in. Do you see how there's a nice pile of embers there now? And that'll get the fire steady away, nicely going. And this top down burn effect, you can see that the logs that I put in, or the larger pieces of wood, are now nicely burning at the bottom, and the stuff on the top has fallen down to create this nice bed of ash, or embers should I say, that we can now put a couple more pieces on just to put it going. And you can see now that the temperatures come up to almost 100 degrees C, and we're just doing a steady, we're not wanting to make it a really hard fast burn today, but the smoke has basically come off the paintwork now, so it's doing its job for the first burn. We're just keeping the vent open for now, might just shut it down a little bit just to get the fire established and a nice bit of temperature. So the stove's been going about 30 to 40 minutes, and the oven has got up to over 200 degrees C, which is actually a bit hotter than I intended doing on the first burn, but I've now shut the firebox down a bit so it's just steady away with some fuel in there. Now the oven's well up over 200 degrees, we may as well use it and cook on it. So the first thing I'm going to do is, just on here with the plate still on, I'm going to put the kettle. That's got about 2 mugfuls of water in it to make a coffee. and that's just going to sit on that plate. You could take the plate off, but that's going to let the smoke out, and not really wanting that. And then what we're going to try for a first cook is the mini pizza, and I'm going to put it on the rack in the middle of the oven, and I'll use the tray to catch any runny cheese or something like that, and I'll open the door quickly, get the rack out, put it in, and that'll maintain a lot of the heat. By doing it that way, it's kept the temperature up on the oven, and we'll give that about 5 or 10 minutes. We'll turn it a couple of times so it doesn't get burnt. The intense heat is obviously on the left hand side of the oven, so you've either got to turn it round regularly or keep it further away from the heat source. Let's see how that goes. While that's cooking, I'll just talk about why we got this stove. We were actually looking for a stove not to use outdoors like this, but inside, and we're actually going to fit it into this garden room that you've probably seen behind us here. That's for another film which I'll do later. As I said, this is just really to get it set up and going. We like this because it's a nice small stove, and it only puts out 3 kilowatts of heat. You don't need a massive amount of heat in a little garden room like that. It's pointless having a big stove, because when you get fired up, you probably have to have the doors open, because it'll be too warm. This will be just right for us, and the little stove and oven feature will be perfect for doing a couple of things like pizzas and a little bit of cooking on the stove while we're in the garden room. There are other manufacturers who make stoves like this. There's one, I think it's called a Silver Fire Tent Dragon. Very similar in size and design, except the door to the firebox is on the end here, which that makes suit some people, but I must admit I like the fact that you can look into this firebox and the oven. The doors are on the same side, you can open them from the front. You don't have to be trying to feed in wood and fuel in through another side. So that's why we've gone for this. Now, I was going to mention about the flue and why this double flange section of the flue goes on the bottom. The idea is that when you put the flue together, any residue, the creosote that comes from the burning of the wood, will come into the flue inner, and it will run down, but run within the flue, down the length of the flue, so it won't drip down the outside. If you turn the flue flanges the other way up, what's going to happen is that the residue is going to run down the inside of the flue and then escape through those flanges and dribble down the outside of the flue. The measurements of the stove, from left to the right, is 55 centimeters. Front to back, it's 27. And when it's on its legs, the overall height is 39. In the firebox, you can get pieces of wood, your fuel, about a maximum of 8 inches long, and that will give you a little bit of space. You don't want them very close up to the glass, because when they burn, they'll smoke the glass. You can see it's happened a little bit here on this one, but you can get logs in there of about 8 inches or 21 centimeters long. The oven, now that measures 27 centimeters wide, the height is 17 centimeters, and it's about 22 centimeters deep. You can buy a cheaper version of this stove from Outbacker, but it's not this, what they call Ecoburn. It's about £100 less, but the Ecoburn version, this is a more recent version that was brought out. This Ecoburn system is a secondary burn firebox. That means that when the fuel is burning, it has that initial burn off the wood, and then the hot gases rise within the firebox and they secondary burn, and that really burns you. You get the most heat produced out of that one amount of fuel. And as you can see, that air wash system that I described earlier, it keeps the door reasonably clean as long as you keep the wood away from the glass. So the pizza's been in a couple of minutes now. This is just going to be a quick opening the door, take the tray out, turn it round so it doesn't burn on one side. Now I've put the stove on this flag that I said we have fitted into our decking anyway for putting a fire pit on, and I'm just feeling the temperature here now. This has been going now for, as I say, 40-45 minutes, and the temperature of the oven got up to 200. It's now at 170, and I was a bit concerned that because there's only a little bit of space between the bottom of the stove and the ground, where there might be some, if you're out in the woods somewhere in a tipi tent or something, there might be some dry tinder, some leaves and twigs and things. So I can put my hand there and that is comfortably warm. It's not even hot. Now there is a bit of draft going through the bottom there. You could put this on a heat pad, but be sensible. Don't set this on a piece of ground where it's likely to catch light, and that includes when you open the door. Bits of embers could drop out and set fire to something. Always keep an eye on this stove, never leave it unattended, and certainly don't keep it going overnight in the teepee, because it will put out some carbon monoxide, and carbon monoxide is a killer. So let it die out, completely cool and stop burning before you go to bed. We'll give it another couple of minutes and we'll see how the pizza's doing. Well, I've turned the pizza around a couple of times, given it a bit of a test, and I think it's about ready. See what this is like. Something nice about eating outside on a wood burning stove. Oh, look at that. Just slide that off there. Looks tasty. Oh, nice crispy crust with melted cheese, and you can see the heat coming off it. Oh, it looks lovely. I'll just take a little bit because that's going to be hot. Lovely. Nice pizza, cup of coffee, wood burning stove. What more do you want? Well, there's not much left of that. Now, we've put the stove together, we've fired it up, we've cooked on it, and I was just curious as to see how long it would take for that to cool down now before we could pack it away. If you were out in the woods somewhere or on the beach, you want to know, you don't want to be putting it in a bag and having it too hot. So I'll just move these out of the way. What I'm going to do, the oven is still up at 150 degrees for now, so we just finished cooking, and I'm going to try and get this to cool down in a fashion that would be the way you would do it if you were out and about. So we're going to open the oven door. That'll let some of the heat out. I'll rake it through a bit and let the embers cool down a little bit quicker, maybe with the door open, and we'll see how long it takes. So I'll use the oven gloves. I'll do that. Of course, the idea of the stove is to provide some heat, so you may just want to let it die down naturally, but if you're in a hurry, this is probably the way I would do it. Just open the firebox door, rake it out a bit, There's still a bit of wood in there which has got a bit to burn yet, so we'll just leave that. And in fact I'll shut the door because it's quite smoky. While it's doing that, I'll just talk about a couple of other things that when I opened the box originally you probably saw me take out, and I'll explain those to you because otherwise you'll be wondering. One of them was this box, and in here is this. It's another piece of flue, except this is twin wall. This is an effect of a flue pipe that will have a double wall on it, so it's more insulated and it won't be hot to touch, or won't be very hot to touch, should I say. It's probably quite warm when it's fired up, and that just slots in as part of the flue. The reason I've got that is that when we eventually fit this into the garden room, which I'll do in the following film, this is the piece that will be the section that will go through the roof, because we want to keep it as far away from combustible material in the wooden cabin as we can, and this I thought would be extra protection. We don't want a fire being caused by a hot flue pipe. And in conjunction with that fitting is this. As I say, these are extras that you can get from Outbacker stoves. They do a whole range of accessories, but these are the two that I wanted. And this one is what they call a flashing kit, and it comes up like that. And this is the kit. It's sort of two-part. There's this bottom ring and then this top ring with the sort of silicone rubber fitting on it, and this would clamp either side of the roof of maybe a bell tent, a canvas tent, or a garden room like this, where you'd need these nuts to tighten up, and they would go on the roof and the flue would go up through there, and it prevents rain from coming down. But of course that extra space is a flashing which allows the combustible material to stay away from the hot flue pipe, and this is what you use to prevent yourself setting fire to your shelter. I'll be demonstrating how I'm going to use this, fitting it to the garden room in the following film. And those are the two bits of extra kit that I've got. That's been about 40-50 minutes, and now it's hardly warm. So this is about the temperature you want to start packing it away. The ash pan needs emptying, of course, and you'll be able to tell how cool it is by the fact that you'll be able to touch the ash pan without burning yourself. And we've just burnt wood on here, and because there's no other additives or anything else polluting the ash, this would be all right for us to spread on our garden here. But wherever you are, make sure that you dispose of your rubbish responsibly, and always make sure that it's completely out. The next thing to do is take the flue section down. Just do a bit of time. Set these on there. These cool very quickly actually, but again, make sure they're perfectly cool before you touch them. And as you saw, these get stored within the stove itself. And I'm having a little look inside there. They're pretty clean. You can see there's some sort of creosote residue left on there, and it's not really coming off. It's not sooty, and that's in there. Now I'll give you a good tip. If you take that off and you find that there's a fair amount of soot, ideally you want to clean it all out firstly before you put it in the bag, because otherwise you're going to get soot all within the bag. But also you don't want a build-up of soot when you keep firing it up time after time. So here's a little tip for you. What you need is one of these, a toilet brush. And if you get a small toilet brush and you're able to use it in these tubes by just, well, let's do it from this end. Just put it in there, give them a bit of a scrub out, and that keeps them nice and clean, especially if it's just soot. And look at that, there's nothing on there. It just shows how clean this stove burns. Now the brush also comes in handy because you can get into the firebox and just give it a brush out, and if you put the pan in there, you'll be able to get out some more of the ash. That goes back in there, and if you remember when I unboxed the stove first, the small lengths of flue pipe go in here and the longer lengths in the oven. And then the final piece is sort of diagonally like that, and you shut the door on it, and that's them. Next thing to do is fold away the legs. And put it in the bag. Now you'll notice that at the top of the bag there's this little sock, and that's for the flue. So obviously they have to marry up when you put them in the bag. And there's room to put in the back rack and the roasting tin, and there's room as well for the brush and your gloves. Zip it all up. And there's some extra securing clips as well. That's it. All ready to go. As I said before at the start, it's about 20 kilos, 22 kilos or something like that. So it's not light, but it's manageable. And that's the look at the Outbacker stove. I think it's a really good bit of kit. It's not cheap, but very good quality, and I'm looking forward to using it over the next few months. When I've had a really good use of it, I'll probably do another film, and especially when we fit it into the garden room behind us. I hope you've enjoyed the film. If you have, don't forget, just click that like button. One simple click means an awful lot. And even better, if you want to subscribe, then you'll see my new films as I post them up on this channel. But in the meantime, thanks for watching.